Did it resist? The captain asked. It's a male, and as you already guessed, it's sentient. So no, he didn't resist, replied the ship's veterinarian, a Shalo named Ginta from V. Captain Antic Tun rolled his eyes. He forgave the woman for her poor attitude. Her race of graceful two-armed four-legged Ulet were a law-abiding sort of people they could never be. Comfortable in the exotic animal and slave trade. Even when their job was only to keep the merchandise alive and in good health, it was fortuitous then that she didn't have much of a choice being merchandise herself. That wasn't to say that she was for sale, only that she wouldn't be for sale until a better veterinarian came along, a tiny whelp. Like that, he wouldn't have stood much chance. He must be smarter than he looks, the captain said with a chuckle. Be grateful to it. Since you don't need to patch it up, you can have the rest of the day to yourself, unless something come up the short fur on her back. Brown laced with white lowered a bit. He wasn't used to seeing her without her hackles up at all times. He wondered if it meant he was going soft. He'd have to extend her hours tomorrow to make up for it. There is something you should know about him, she added before turning to leave, her tone brighter than normal. He seems like a nice young man, but I think he could have done more harm than you suspect. Had he resisted, he's heavily muscled, much more so than even a high-grav world would require, and he's a carnivore that gave the captain pause. Carnivorous species were a rarity in the universe, and sentient ones were even rarer still. In fact, he couldn't think of a single intelligent species that routinely chose to eat the flesh of other creatures, except for one. Glancing to the deck plates beneath his broad hooves, he thought immediately of the lithe predator lurking in its cell deep. In the bowels of his vessel, a night beast from a Class 11 death world. Its sentience was highly debatable. Captain Anticon ran his thick tongue over his blunt teeth. He didn't think this hairless whelp was anything like that at all. That's not possible, he said. Our newest guest, what did he call himself? Human. Said the vet named Stephen. The human has herbivore teeth. Don't see how he could possibly be a carnivore up close. He did not display his teeth much. But when he did, I noticed a set of fangs, very, very small, almost like the rest of his teeth. But there, she pointed to the space between her incisors and molars, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Little fangs, really. He didn't believe her. What else? Don't tell me you didn't notice the way it stares its 2 eyes. How do they make you feel deeply, instinctively fearful? Creeped out. Might be a better word. The thing was tiny, chest high, and when I was trying to figure out what to feed it, the Ginta continued. I was shocked to discover that fully 1/2 of the rations in its craft by calorie content were comprised of animal protein. She looked sick. He could sympathize. It was one thing to talk about eating flesh in an academic sense, but to actually have to see an animal's carcass dressed for consumption up close, disgusting, point taken, he said, I'll be careful around it. That meant he'd be armed and wouldn't hesitate to shoot it. Novelties like a new species were worth money, but not that much, not enough to risk his life. He might even just kill it for fun every time he went on vacation. He spent more money than the creature was probably worth on more pointless and less satisfying pursuits. There is another thing to be wary of, said Aunt Ticton, thinking aloud. If he has a significant amount of musculature he doesn't need, he might be some kind of super soldier engineered to be that way. Maybe, said the vet. There's no way for me to confirm or refute that. But it is certainly a possibility, so we have a carnivorous super soldier locked a bunk. Not even a cell, let alone a reinforced cell. That's just great. Add that to the night beast caged in the BGE, and it's a wonder why we all aren't dead 10 times over already. Well, in fairness, Sten seems really nice. Said the vet, maybe make them fight. Chuckled the ship's executive officer. He had walked in to begin his shift, while the captain and Ginta had been speaking. He smiled. Maybe night beasts, night stalkers, night terrors, the people of the night putting one in the same room as anyone. Even a possible super soldier meant sentencing him or her to die. Those nocturnal hunters were the stuff of nightmares and horror vids, purely carnivorous. They could eat plant matter like any normal race, but would become blind, start to wither away, and eventually die off without flesh to supplement it. They were small compared to most beings, but incredibly strong and moved faster than the eye could track, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, claws up to 8 centimeters long on their feet, and a kick powerful enough to take the head off a massive ice-walking Kent. They were near-perfect land predators the night. Beasts hailed from Nyx, a high-gravity Class 11 death world far out on the northern galactic rim, and thankfully not anywhere else calling them sentient was a matter of debate. They had no technology to monitor. No one had dared step foot on their world long enough to study them peacefully, and those that were taken by force tended to be less than cooperative indeed, no less than. 3 ships had had their crews slaughtered to a being after poaching a live night beast in 2 of the cases where scans showed only the creature alive aboard the ships were railgunned into oblivion. Just to be on the safe side, the insurance companies would have much rather written them off as a total loss than risked recovering them. The 3rd case had been different. The ship had been recovered in orbit around NX with a single escape pod missing, and nothing but dead bodies aboard logs indicated that the creature had gotten loose when the ship was some 20,000 light-years away, warping space at full speed for its home port curiously in order to make the ship reverse course the emergency. Lockdown had to have been somehow overridden and the ship's AI reprogrammed. That's not to say no study whatsoever had been done on the thing's solitary specimens had been killed, collected, and studied, but there was only so much a carcass could tell scientists. From the necropsies, they said their brains seemed capable of intelligent thought, but theory and practice were often very different there. Was no way of knowing for sure, but AI tasked with decrypting their language from 1 or 2 illicit probes seemed to think they were capable. But the recordings of the escape incidents on all 3 of those vessels played back nothing more than inarticulate screams of rage, untranslatable gibberish, and demands for intercourse, this intercourse, that intercourse, you, and so on, even as they tore throats out with bare hands and disemboweled stomachs with clawed bare feet. These were, of course, blatant mistranslations, despite AI protestations to the contrary. Since the most recent incident years ago, Anti-Ton hadn't heard of anyone else illegally visiting the planet, let alone claiming one of the beasts. It could have been that they were simply successful and no one heard about it, but he doubted it then. 2 standard weeks ago, he and his crew of mostly willing servants had been offered more credits than he had seen outside a lottery drawing for one of the monstrosities alive and in good condition, having a veterinarian, who couldn't refuse to work. Had been a gift from the 5 lords of heaven. He had agreed to procure a night beast for a very noble buyer, a member of the idle rich interested in exotic animals. For his managery, the pay would be enormous and included capture tools, medical equipment like tranquilizers, and a translator for his vet to implant, and retrofitting his ship to hold the thing before the venture had even begun. The translator was almost funny, with a thing not so expensive and hazardous to implant. The buyer had insisted that if worst came to worst, they should try to reason with rather than kill it, and lose what credits he had already invested. The easy part was acquiring it. It had been off on a solo night hunt somewhere on the plains of Nyx's broken surface when they found it. It only took 1 dart of the specially developed drug used to tranquilize, though it was so powerful that it could have killed off his entire crew and all his merchandise where it divided up evenly between them. The being had only 4 appendages, smooth skin with soft lavender tone, and had covered itself in skins that weren't its own. A length of jet-black fur swept back from where it attached to the top of its head and ran down to where its lower appendages met its torso. The 2 razor-sharp claws were present on its feet, each almost a decimeter long, with a 3rd tiny vestigial claw. On the outsides, its 3 fingers on each hand were as blunt as any sentience. It was a large specimen for its kind at 175 centimeters, and incredibly dense with heavy muscles. 4 men had to carry it onto a levitation pallet, and then on into its hardened composite cage, which itself was inside a heavily reinforced cargo hold in the belly of his ship. So far, the creature had killed only 3 of his crewmen. As far as Captain Ankton was concerned, that was already an acceptable Return on investment, fewer people to share the prize, and he got to learn who among his men was dumb enough to approach the docile-looking creature during feedings, despite being specifically told not to do so. He had hoped to limit the amount of flesh the thing consumed in order to keep it in a weakened state, but that wasn't going to happen now. It hadn't. Even finished with the first corpse before it killed the other two crewmen. They had tried to pull their already dead friend from its cage. Instead, they only ended up joining him inside. How a 1.5 meter wide, 2 1/2 m tall Tauraton male could fit between the 10-centimeter wide gaps in the bars was one of the mysteries of nature. It went to show that if one pulled hard enough, anything was possible. The captain wasn't worried. The night beast ate 3 meals per night cycle. As best as he could tell, they would eventually recover the all-wayward crewman. As it threw the finished bones from its cage, it had tried to kill a 4th and 5th time, but only managed to take a tentacle off one crewman and shatter another's upper hip. They hadn't gotten close to it. No vid footage proved that the thing had thrown the thigh bones of the consumed crewman at their compatriots with deadly force and accuracy. He hadn't known it could do that. Quick-witted observers erected a force field between the cage and the entrance to the hold, just in time to prevent lethal follow-up projectiles. Not once, since it had been here, had it done anything. But roar and scream. He had tried to talk to it a few times, but got nowhere. His conversations always ended the same way, with him having to blast it with cold water hard enough to kill a man just to shut it up. It rarely worked at first, but when he did it for long enough, it usually just ended up accepting its fate, silently gasping for air, half drowned in the corner of its cell as the water pounded. He didn't do that more than a few times. It's not that he felt sorry for it or didn't feel like getting vengeance for his crew, although he could not care less. It was just that he had better things to do than torture a stupid beast. No, he would definitely not be putting this human anywhere within reach of this thing. The snuff vids of the dismemberment would be valuable, sure, but perhaps not as able as a slave from an uncharted world. Those like Stephen were totally off record, with no one to come looking for them and nowhere to escape. To some of the less reputable slave buyers would pay top credit for the likes of him that, and he didn't feel inclined to give the night beast yet another week's worth of hearty meals. The captain caught G's eye as she frowned at the Exo's notion, apparently. She didn't like the idea of staging animal fights for fun and profit either, but probably for reasons like morality and empathy. No, I don't think I'm going to feed Stephen to the night beast. Not today anyway. Probably turning to his Exo and Kun, said, "Tell me, Mashi, you were part of the tracking and recovery team. Where is this thing from? That's the question of the hour," said the other man, using a set of grasping tentacles to rub his proboscis. He may have been part of a convoy, fell out of some massive group warp bubble and became lost. His ship has a warp field generator of its own, but it's small and crude. Tick Carrick in engineering looked at the computer too to try and find out where it came from. But even with the AI helping, she says it's totally bricked. We think that's what caused him to be stranded in the first place. This ship is powered by antimatter. What bellowed the captain once we found out we jettisoned it. Thanks the gods and lords. The captain shook his head in disbelief. That's just insane. So wait a minute, if it has a warp drive and is powered by antimatter of all things, why would you jump to the conclusion that it was part of a convoy? It's the only thing that makes sense. Mari explained the maximum range of its craft with a full containment field was about 400 light years. 40% of its containment had been expended. So, I take it there are no habitable world within 160 light years. You're quick with math, sir, and no. The captain rubbed his furrowed brow and sighed. So it is possible that it will be missed. That's not good news. Maybe they'll just chalk it up to the hazards of driveless warp travel, the Exo reasoned. And even if they do come looking, if there's a whole group of these things trying to get somewhere at once, then it must be pretty important, so I doubt they'll start right away. I've got a super predator and possible super soldier on my ship. The human was probably part of some alien invasion force heading for one of the fringe territories. His ship looked exactly like an orbital drop pod with a warp field generator attached, doesn't it? There was some evidence that it was a multi-staged craft. Yes, the drive section may have been designed to be discarded in order to allow planetary entry of the capsule, but there is the question of why it would travel using a convoy warp bubble when it has a perfectly good drive of its own, which it won't use and then discard before planet fall. Could be standardization of design, but I really doubt that. But if that's not the case, then we're back to the question of range. He huffed, and then he lifted his snout from his hand where it had been buried in frustration, and there were no weapons aboard his craft. Said Mishi, though he was wearing a surprisingly strong set of armor, it appears too impervious to vacuum radiation, heat, cold small arms, fire large arms fire, poisonous atmospheres and hostile wildlife, among other things. The thing is tough but flexible. People have that kind of technology, not really. No, the Exo explained, gesturing a tentacle in the negative, not in the sense that you mean it's not terribly advanced. Any of the galactic races could make something like that, they just couldn't make use of it. It took 4 of us just to drag it to the cargo hold. The captain's expression went flat and he was wearing it. Yes, he was in here, Antoon asked, pointing to the deck not out on some extravehicular excursion. Yes, in here? The Exo pulled his proboscis tightly shut, the equivalent of pursing his lips. It seems that he didn't like where this conversation was going either. A thought occurred to the captain. Then just how in the 7 hells of Borgon did you even get him out of it? Oh, we asked him to remove it, Yes, he's very nice. I don't give a how nice he is. Marshy hastened to interrupt, sir. I don't think he knows he's been abducted into slavery. That was just plain dumb. His assessment of this being's race fell a few notches. On the other hand, it was entirely possible that this genetic freak was not representative of its people. In fact, it was entirely likely he wasn't. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If this was a super soldier on its way to war, the thing had only to sit in its podland and fight. It didn't need to be very smart, which might have contributed to why its computer was destroyed, explained how it couldn't find its way back, and explained why it didn't know it was a piece of merchandise. Heck, the thing was probably so dumb that its people wouldn't have even bothered to give it a gun until after it had landed and had safe direction in which to point it. It was probably programmed to be compliant and take orders, which was why it seemed get along well with everyone. One last thing. Before I go, sir, the vet said meekly. He had forgotten that G-Tier was even standing there. It looks similar to what to two, she stuttered softly. Spit it out, he said impatiently, motioning for her to continue that thing. She whispered, pointing to the deck below her feet. The captain and Exo each sucked in a breath of air. He hadn't thought about it, but the more he did, the more the captain realized she was right. They were both bipedal teeter-pods for one. It was an efficient but inherently unstable design suited for organisms that were either on the move or at rest, and nowhere in between, that were both mostly bow for another. Their heads were differently shaped, but not nearly as much as any 2 other races might have been. The coloration was different. This human was a pale, MTL'd cream color, and night beasts generally were anywhere from light blue to purple to jet black. They were the same general height from heel to scalp, though the human might have been taller and bulkier, actually. And then there were their eyes, forward-facing like gun barrels aimed right at you, bright and dangerous. He hoped the humans didn't glow at night like the beasts did. The thought sent a chill down his spine. On the other hand, comparing the two felt just plain stupid. Engineered soldier or not, Stephen was one step above a friendly pet, and came from a people with adequate technology. If this were a true case of convergent evolution, his people would also have to have been from a Class 11 death world, almost exactly like Nick's, that simply couldn't be because death worlds could not produce true sentient, only feral monstrosities. The captain rolled his eyes and sighed internally. He would still perform his due diligence and try his best to determine if this thing posed any real risks, even if he was highly skeptical. XO, is it safe to talk to the human? He asked. I think so, said Mari, with Ginta nodding in agreement. His translator is working great now, and I was chatting with him for a bit, told him I had to lock him in his room for operational security reasons. He didn't have the clearance to be wandering about. I think he bought it after all. We've learned of him. I wouldn't let slip that he's anything other than a guest. He might not be as compliant. The captain thought a moment. Ginter, your evening is cancelled. You'll start developing poisons and sedatives to use on this thing immediately. Airborne but harmless to everyone else. If possible, go now. The woman nodded and slowly trotted off the bridge, even her hoofbeat sounding dejected. I'm going to go have a chat with Stephen before I retire for the evening, said Captain Ankton with that. He stood from his chair and left without another word. The captain pulled up the one chair in the cell and took a seat across from him. Their guest lounged on his padded bunk. It was meant to be uncomfortably small, but with him it seemed decadently large. His unusual coverings were folded up behind him, as a pillow and a blanket covered him from his waist to his toes. His chest and arms were exposed, showing off his substantial musculature. Less than a meter of space stood between them. In the padded cell, nice place you got here, said the human. I stayed on a terrestrial ship once, and they've got nothing on you guys compared to our spacecraft. Well, this ship is like a floating palace. How do you do it? The captain certainly hadn't expected to be praised for the accommodations, but given its small stature and the confines of the craft, they found him in. He should not have been surprised. Well, we value our guests and strive to provide the best we can offer for them, he replied. Trying his best to sound sincere. Gods and lords, this thing was stupid. But the bunks for our crew are what you might typically find on any military or patrol spacecraft. This was a lie across the board. He had no idea what the inside of a military or a patrol craft looked like, and his quarters were 2 stories and about 100 square m. Wow. Thank you for the guest-ment, then the human said. And I want to thank you for rescuing me out there. I thought that module would be my tomb buried alive in space. The captain could empathize. It was any space's worst nightmare. He suppressed a shudder. Really selling this man into a life of servitude was doing him a favor. His potential buyer probably wouldn't put such a novelty to work at hard labor when he could be used as a conversation piece. He would probably spend his days entertaining and doing parlor tricks as a house slave. Not a bad way to live, better than death by starvation in a metal pod. Well, it was the least we could do here on the Bright Hope. He said the ship's name was the Han Harvester. We were a few light years out. But when we picked up your warp field collapsing and saw you couldn't get it going again, well, we knew we had to help. You can actually detect the warp bubbles of other vessels real time. From light years away, the human asked, sitting up a little straighter in his bunk. Had he been taller, he would have hit his head. The captain was taken aback. He definitely hadn't expected the human to have cared about something like that. He hadn't even expected him to be capable of caring about something like that. Well, yeah, Antic Tun replied, rubbing his chin. How? Do you do it? The smaller man asked. Does the warp field project itself ahead of the bubble, or maybe the compressed space causes ripples ahead of it like a stone in water? This creature was not stupid. Not by a long shot. That sword sort of technology is classified, Captain Anton replied. In truth, he had no idea how the hell they did it. That was probably a question for the guys who build the sensor suite they bought. Oh, right. Like the Prime Directive Stevens said? Perhaps seeing the confusion on the captain's face, he hastened to clarify. Humans have speculated that there might be a rule that prevents more advanced sentience from providing technology to less advanced sentience for fear of disrupting the natural course of their development. No. That was about the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. It's more of a security issue. We can't give away technology when we don't know how it might be used. That was a lie, of course, but much more believable than the idea. The he, or anyone else who wasn't an anthropologist, gave a flying about. The development of some PR-atives, nothing aboard his ship couldn't be procured by anyone on the open market in a spacecraft or law enforcement supply store. He just didn't want to admit to this human that he had no idea how the sensors worked, and this excuse played well in keeping their guest behind a locked door. May I ask some questions about you? Ankun asked to get a better idea of your status. Of course, came the quick reply. Good, the captain made a show of pulling out a data pad and a stylus. So, what is your profession? I'm an explorer, the human said with a nod, an almost universal indicator for, yes, you're not a soldier, the captain asked. You were wearing armor when we found you, and beneath that you wore coverings with insignia. Oh no, he replied. I used to be an airman. The captain's translator supplied warrior, whose domain is aerospace, for the unusual humane word that his people had a single simple word for that was disconcerting. Still, there were plenty of harmless races with deep martial traditions, but I'm a civilian. Now, civilian became one who is not serving in the military, as if that wasn't already an assumption in their language again. Disconcerting, but not terribly unusual. What are you exploring? The captain asked idly, typing nonsense into his datapad. Oh, the galaxy said, Sten, I'm conducting humanity's first man extrasolar space flight and our first man-effective FTL test. It didn't go as planned. We kind of figured that out when we recovered you from the void, said the captain. And those symbols on your skin covering, they remind me of some military identification and rank. I've seen a few races using. He pulled his covering from behind him, a bright orange one-piece with numerous pockets, zippers, fasteners, and insignia. Not at all. None of these are even remotely related to the military, he said, pointing to each. In turn, he explained this. One is the government-funded explorer organization I work for called NASA. This one is for the government that funds it, the United States of America. These are for the mission and the spacecraft that brought me here and malfunctioned Project Pathfinder and the Victoria. This last patch with the wings means I'm a pilot, and it has my first name Stephen, my family name McLaren, my tribe name Lieutenant Colonel, and my clan name USAF. Okay? The captain replied. I thought as much. So this thing really was an engineered super soldier, or any kind of soldier at all for that matter. That still left other questions, and my suit wasn't armor. Sten continued folding his orange skin covering. It's just for survival in case of a hull breach. Were you genetically engineered? Asked the captain. No, not at all. 100% natural. Why, it's just one of those questions we have to ask. There can be concerns with unnatural biological contaminations, he said again. Not true at all, but it sounded better than I need to know if I should put you in a stronger cage. The captain licked his teeth and snout next. Question. Are you carnivorous for a moment? The man said nothing as it drew its eyebrows together, the expression for confusion. Perhaps you mean like eating meat. The single word meat had been translated as flesh of a prey animal. Now that was a red.